Hello, thank you for your presentation. My name is Jean de Dieu Hakizimana, and I live in Canada for the last 15 years. And I made a claim, refugee claim, in Canada. When we're talking about those process, when you see this picture here, remind me in Vancouver. What I'm going to say, maybe I hope no one will against me what I want to say. People ask me, what is the mistake you ever made in your life? One mistake is to make refugees claimant in Canada. And I share this with many people like me in British Columbia, anywhere else in Canada. You can ask me why. Because when these things happen to you, actually you deny yourself, your humanity. You don't even know who you are. And that particular time, they were what called hardship assistance for refugees. And it was very hard. If you seek food, land, like very difficult. And you exposed to drug, to sexuality, to anything can happen to you. Most of those people who don't have a strong life, like myself, I made my education here, I have my job, I'm surviving. If I explain what I met those particular 2 years without paper in Vancouver, was the people I see in single room in the downtown east side. In single, is anyone here who live in a single room in downtown east side? No. That is a story. You hear, you never know what that kind of life is. Actually, I love Canadians. Canadians are the people who have a good heart, but the government is a criminal government.
Yes, right.
They are not connected. The faith to help people is not the government. In other countries in Europe, they have a detention house. I wish if I did go to Belgium or France or Norway, they detain me 6 months, and I know after that I'm going to have a paper and I'm going to have a good life. And people will encourage you, will help you. You will be in the process which will help you. If those house, detention house, has the faith of the government and have the faith that they will help you, you will be integrated, that is a very good process. But that faith is not there. And those 40 million refugees are dark-skinned people, black people. 20 of them are black people. And Canada is one of the countries is not welcoming black people, especially British Columbia. Actually, British Columbia wish if there is no black live here. That's my question. I wanted someone to make a comment about that. And that's the really true situation, and that's the true life, and that's people living like that. Doesn't matter. I hope no one is going to against me with that. Thank you so much. But that's the true life.
Thank you. Well, let me let the panel quickly respond to that question. I think I know the answer, but is there a clear racial line to the countries that are considered safe as opposed to unsafe?
I would have to say no. Look, you have Hungary, safe. Mexico, safe. India. I don't have the figures at hand. My sense is that the acceptance rate for claims from African countries tends to be quite high. I was surprised recently, I was looking, I think Nigeria is up around 60%. But the problem is that we make it extremely difficult for anyone from Africa to get here. This government also pays tribute to what they call the good refugees, the people who wait their turn in the camps in Africa or elsewhere, and are selected, cherry-picked out of the camps. And most of the camps are in Africa, and people will wait decades in those camps. Many will die before they actually have a chance of being resettled to Canada. We take about 10,000 people from camps every year.
There's a question there.
Yeah. Hi. Can you hear me? Yeah. I'm not an immigrant. I'm a student in British Columbia. I come from Colombia. I'm a graphic designer. I'm not related to any law background or human rights, but I come from a country who has like large issues in terms of human rights. My experience, which has been completely different from a refugee, has been a strong difficulty accessing the information. And after having made a few processes through becoming a student and then getting like an off-site campus, I'm starting like looking at this premeditated complication of the access to information. It feels that is a segregation, a cultural segregation in terms of hiding the information, making it complicated. You can feel that things are hidden, you know, put behind other things. You can easily divert. And I think that in the process of a refugee, they will face that kind of challenge. So is there an organization or someone who is like auditing those online tools or forms like people need to fill in order to make, you know, this very short process even more, you know, better? If you can speak about that.
I'm not aware of organizations that are auditing, but there are certainly community organizations that do some of the bridging and mediating work. Lobat works when Versa and Vast SOS are all, you know, on the ground. But I mean, I think your observation of the ways that sort of access to information obscures access to justice and bars access to justice is really bang on.
My name is Elsa. About 6 years ago, we applied for refugee. We participate in 5 hearings, 2 judicial review, and now we go again for the new hearing. But my point in this question is, it's supposed the law is the same for everybody, for the government and for us. But we received many mistakes. In the first hearing, we received the letter, you can present any proof, any widow, any nothing, 20 days before the hearing. But 2 days before, 48 hours before, the Minister of the Justice sent the one letter, he will participate in our hearing with the one widow, and then our hearing no was 1 day, it was 3 days. And the result is, the judge said, you can go to your country and you explain everything here, and you have the same justice in your country. I don't know what is the judge. My country, El Salvador, no have a justice the same here, and then he can hear our barrister, our lawyer in our country, he running in this time, and then we go to the judicial review, we won to the hearing 2 times, we won, and now the Minister of the Justice appeared again and said, no, we don't accept the resolution. But 3 days after the time is the 1 month, they apply in the federal court 33 days after the resolution, 3 days after the timeline. And the federal court accept the resolution, and we go to the federal court, and in the federal court we have a crazy judge because it's insane and crazy and make the job not correspond. What is the justice of the government? Is not one order, judge, and was not consent. He come in the salon and say, close the line. I don't want the line. I don't want to talk to nobody. I think we finish now. You go again. He don't hear our lawyer. He don't hear nothing. He made the decision. We have the federal court finish at 1 p.m. and the next day at 9 p.m. at 9 a.m. we have a resolution 22 pages. It's crazy. We go in at this point with the some resolution. We don't hear nothing about. We apply for study here. You're not a resident. You have to pay like international. You apply for the one job. I am civil engineer. Have 2 master's degree. 1 in Europe, 1 in my country. Nothing is valid.
Let me just interrupt. Can you give us a specific question?
My question is, what is the reason the government made anything out all the time? If we apply for something, the law is our side. For the government, doesn't matter 3 days before, after the time to limit it for the federal court, is 2 days, 48 hours before the hearing, when the law says it's just only 20 days, you have to present everything. What is the reason the law is only in our side, the time limit is in our side, and for the government made any mistake, and the federal court accepts everything?
So it sounds like one of the issues here, and some of you raised it, there's obviously the time limit issue, but there's also a sort of an arbitrariness that I think we've heard here, and I've heard from other refugee claimants, that it doesn't seem like there's a sort of a straight sense of due process. Is that something that you've seen in your work? Maybe we can hear from some of the folks who haven't spoken yet.
Yeah, there definitely is a sense of arbitrariness, because so much of it is decided by one decision maker. So that makes it definitely feel as if it's arbitrary. No matter, all different processes in immigration usually are going to one person to make that very big decision. And in terms of the minister being given special leeways, certainly Bill C-31 doesn't make it any better, it makes it much worse. There's actually provisions in it with respect to the appeal, I mean, for those who have access to the appeal, where it's blatantly set out that some rules apply to the minister and some rules apply to claimants. And so, yeah, I agree, it's not fair and can feel very arbitrary.
Thanks.
And there was a quick follow-up over here also.
Okay.
Thank you. I asked for the picture because she is my wife, and she forget to say something important. The justice, I mean the judge, before the judicial review, called our lawyer. He's one of the colleagues emerging of the lawyer. And this justice said, our lawyer, that he speak with the other part, the minister. What is that? What kind of country is this? The judge speaking with the other part and call our lawyer and said, and you know all the lawyer have fear to the judge. So it's natural that it's important, but it's unfair for us.
So are there rules about ex parte communication with these situations? Some lawyers here maybe can comment.
Sounds quite unusual to me.
We only have about 20 minutes left, so it's wonderful to hear all of your stories. If we could try, just for the sake of getting as many questions in as possible, if we could try to keep the comments and questions as concise as possible, I think everyone would appreciate it.
Hi. Okay. So I had a question. I was struck by the last speaker when you said that this was an entrenchment that sort of struck me a little bit, because I do have kind of maybe a very naive idea about what Canada is and what it represents, but you think about it, Canada wasn't nice at all to Jews coming here in World War II. So can we talk a little bit about some of that, that this is sort of an entrenchment rather than a change or an aberration or a sudden kind of shift in policy? It's sort of a solidifying of some things that are going on in sort of minor ways, like a long bureaucracy, difficulties, and different kind of definitions. Can we speak more to that history and how it's kind of continuous rather than disruptive with it?
Why don't you start?
Thank you for that, and I think, I mean, it's what you said. I mean, I think we probably have different opinions on this panel and within this room, but I think there's kind of a paradox, right? Because on the one hand, Canada's recognized as this leader in accepting refugees, but when we look at the scale of displacement and some of the kind of facts in terms of who is displaced and where most displaced people go, most people go to other countries, right? So when we're talking about Canada accepting a large number of people, it's really minor in the scale of how many people are displaced. But definitely if we look at policy, and we also just look at popular consciousness, right? Part of this is about law, but part of this is also about just how, just hearing people's stories about how people feel as refugees and migrants, and, question, and the comment about race and racism within society. These are deeply entrenched that go much beyond one policy and one law. These are kind of embedded notions of who belongs and who doesn't. And certainly, the St. Louis, the Kamagata Maru, the Chinese head tax, the Japanese internment, there's so many examples of communities constantly being cast as racial outsiders. That often goes beyond someone's legal status, right? And so when we talk about refugee policy, in my opinion, devoid of context of race and devoid of a context of class, then it becomes harder, perhaps, to see this kind of embedded nature. But when we look at it within that framework, it becomes much easier to see how refugee policy, and particularly restrictions on refugees, is really part and parcel of this nation-building exercise, right, about who belongs. And it wasn't very long ago when the idea of white Canada was really popularly talked about. Now we don't talk about white Canada openly, but we have really harmless ways of talking about who belongs and who doesn't, right? So we can often talk to people of color who've been here for generations and ask them where they're from, which to me reveals a kind of innocuous sense of who belongs and who doesn't. And so I'm answering your question in a different way, because what I'm interested in us thinking about is the ways in which race is constructed in popular consciousness and how refugee policy feeds into that and again entrenches that. And so for me, yeah, Bill C-31 is really part and parcel of a much longer legacy of racial exclusion, of racism within Canada, and it's part of a whole bunch of other patterns and policies and legislated exclusions. So that's the short, long answer.
And just sort of to piggyback on that, but to look at some more recent history, I guess. Just a quick, a comment and a quick question for the panel. It feels like C-31 is kind of a re-manifestation of a bunch of other bills that didn't get to pass because the Conservatives weren't a majority then. And now they are a majority, and they've actually put in a lot of incredibly horrendous things in this bill that weren't a part of the bills before. And also a bunch of things that sort of have led up to it. For example, I don't know if anybody really talked about this, but 300,000 applications were virtually wiped out. And these are people who have been waiting and have applied like 10 years ago. 300,000 applications, and we don't hear about these things, and it's not a part of C-31, but it's already happened. So I think sort of the follow-up question for me is how do you see Bill C-31 within the broader context of the Harper government? Because I'm in here in solidarity with the students, but there's obviously a lot in Quebec, but there's obviously a lot of other stuff that the Harper government is doing that's horrifying, and it's all being pushed through because they're a majority, and I'm just wondering if you can comment on that. Anybody really?
All in a non-partisan way, right?
Be partisan, it's all right.
I'll talk a little bit about my experience of the difference between addressing the Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration for C-11 under the minority government situation versus the majority government, conservative majority government situation. There was, in my experience, some attempt at respectful engagement and Parliament working together to create something. I mean, there are many ways that C-11 was continued retrenchment of a very regressive refugee policy. Sorry, I got a message to explain what C-11 is. This was the legislation that was pushed or moved through 2 years ago. Whereas when we are looking at the way that C-31 has been, it has been pushed through, and there was, if you look at those proceedings, no effort to really listen, engage, dialogue at all.
Can I ask a really quick follow-up maybe to Elizabeth? One of the things that that's been often brought up is that one thing that's supposedly spurred this is this real concern for the large number of refugee claimants from Hungary. I've been outspoken about my concerns about the Orban government in Hungary, the right-wing government, which has been quite discriminatory and has made in my opinion, made the situation for Roma in Hungary more difficult. But there are a lot of Roma refugee claimants from Hungary. Do you think that has played into helping to push this further along than it might have gone?
Oh, definitely. I do think that is very much the case. It's actually very interesting to know that the minister traveled to Europe to actually hand out pamphlets to the Roma community, trying to get them to not come here. And so he's taking a very proactive role in going to some of the European countries that a lot of the Roma refugees are coming from, such as Hungary, Slovakia, and the Czech Republic. And he's trying to deter them from coming here. Because of the fact that he feels that a lot of their claims, as he is stating, are bogus. And there was one time where he noted that there was a whole plane of Roma that came over from, I think it was from Hungary, but that he said, basically stating that people are coming here in planefolds trying to claim refugee status that are bogus. Meanwhile, those claimants that arrived that day were basically five families that made up those 71 people. He also basically he's tried to deter Roma from being even interested in coming to Canada. So it's definitely, I think that part of the problem that he sees as it is a Roma problem is could probably have to do a lot with Bill C-31 and trying to keep Roma refugees out of the country.
Just so everyone knows, we are going to have to, we have our questions. We have lots of questions. So everyone who said that you can speak a question, you have the question, but nobody else at this point can in this forum ask a question. However, I am sure that this will not be the end of the conversation. So we do have some questions already selected, and unfortunately we're going to have to cut off the speaker list at this time. So just so folks know.
Right. Thank you for the information. It's looking pretty much like a reactionary time we're in here. My sense of it all is that we're being totally railroaded. Totally. In a number of ways, just like the CP rail strike being railroaded through Senate and everything right now. They are putting us off balance. And we're at the end of our time, and my question is, from your position of privileged knowledge and experience, what's the next step for us?
Thank you. You stole my last question, but that's a good one.
I was going to just try to answer that one and connect it maybe to the previous question, because you're both kind of tying into this broader framework about what's happening. And just to emphasize a few quick points, So, one is, again, the C-31 is happening at a time when other policies being passed. So there was reference to the 300,000 immigration applications being wiped out, many other immigration and refugee policies that are happening. And so I think what we have to do, I think one of the problems in terms of conceiving of C-31 is because there's a conservative majority, it becomes hard to imagine what one can do to stop this legislation. But I think when we think about it in a broader context about social movements, when we think about the kind of popular movements, the kind of popular education we need to create, there's reference to the Quebec student strike, which is incredibly inspiring, right? And I don't, people really trying to create change when it seems impossible, being able to do that. And I think particularly with the Harper government and the connection to C-31, I think there's several, right? So Bill C-31 mandates increasing incarceration. That's happening at the same time as we're seeing prisons being expanded in Canada. So there's a huge connection between criminalization and prison expansion and refugee criminalization. Bill C-31 again entrenches this kind of racism, and we're seeing this kind of racism in all ways in Canada, right? So we're seeing the niqab ban, we're seeing an attack on Indigenous people, we're seeing an attack on immigrants. So if we understand Bill C-31, then we can see the need to create much deeper anti-racist popular consciousness. I think that's a key strategy. I think the final piece is that Bill C-31 really is connected to austerity, right? We're living in a time where corporations are getting bailed out, we know that. Refugees are a product of these systems. And refugees and immigrants are being criminalized at a time where we want more and more temporary foreign workers. So what Canada wants in an era of austerity is cheap labor, right? So workers are being attacked. There's reference to the CP rail strike. There's a number of strikes going on in Canada. Permanent residents and refugees are really being dissuaded, essentially, from coming to Canada because what Canada wants is migrants to represent commodified labor. And I think the answer to that is really to flip that and say, no, we want to welcome migrants as human beings. We want to welcome refugees as refugees who belong to a global humanity. And we won't accept a logic where migrants are just going to be cheap labor and cash cows for capital, right? And so I think when we see these as connected, it gives us a platform to start imagining the reversal of C-31 and this whole entrenchment of anti-refugee policy. And so I think the answer really is in broad-based social movements, is my answer.
Hello, can you guys hear me? Yeah, my name's Caroline. I totally understand where you're coming from, Harsha. I think we may know some people mutually. I don't know, I'm from the Philippines, so I totally know everything about temporary workers, disposable workers, living caregiver program alone, right? But anyway, so I've been here for more than 16 years, and I've actually been here a year longer than Jose Figueroa, and I'm a citizen, and how I belong to this nation is not questioned. Just because my parents gone through official route, because we had money to shell out for an entrepreneurial route, whatever, start a small business sort of thing, right? And I don't really see how my citizenship is so different from Jose, so that's just personally why I'm invested in this case. But then, I totally understand where you're coming from, that, it's not, Bill C-31's not the end all be all, it's just one, the latest deadline, all that. I understand that the broader strategy is broader social, consciousness of how it's all interrelated, right? And instead of just looking at it, specific policy by policy basis, but specifically, in the next month, what can we do?
Organize. Use your anger. What activism or social mobilization looks like is different for everybody depending on what your social location, your social position, your class, your occupation. So figure out where your power is and use it. It is not too late to be letting MPs know that you object to this bill strenuously. It will probably pass because of the majority government, but Liberal and NDP MPs need to know that they have support from voters when it comes to election time to address some of these regressive measures. So write to your MPs, email them, call them, show up at their offices. Talk to your friends. I know June 18th at noon
the CIC office at 1148 Hornby. There's going to be a lot of angry healthcare workers. I'll be there. Wear your scrubs or your lab coat or whatever you use to identify yourself as that part of a healthcare worker, and all are welcome, okay? Show up, noon, CIC office, 1148 Hornby.
Okay, my name is Han, an international student from China. I have several questions. The first is, what makes those countries such as India, Mexico be deemed as safe country which produce few refugees? Is it just because of few claims, or are there other reasons on the table? The second question is if the bill is passed, is it possible that the bill will actually help the bolster instead of real refugees to get acceptance from government? Thank you.
Sorry, what was the first question? I should have written it down.
Mexico and India.
Elections and trade. Quite simple. Mexico has a democratic process of sorts. I had a client once who had the misfortune to be witness to electoral fraud, which resulted in the election of the previous government, but nonetheless it's perceived as a democratic country, and it's very embarrassing for our Prime Minister to have to say to the President of Mexico that we don't consider you to be democratic. Oh yeah, will this process help bogus claimants get through? I think it will.
If you look at what sort of helps good decision making, it's the first person who looks at the evidence, having the best possible evidence. Okay, this process works against that. If you look at what helps good decision making, it's also the claimants being well prepared. This works against that. Okay, and so I think, in fact, in many ways, this process will, it's a charade. It will lead to poor decisions in both ways, and does nothing. And I also want to point out, it's important that we not play into the language of the bogus refugee. Minister Kenny is very proud, or frequently uses the number of 58% to suggest that that's the number of sort of false claims that are there. No, that's the percentage of folks who are refused, but many of those folks have very legitimate fears. It may not necessarily cross the threshold of what is considered persecution by a decision maker, but they're very legitimate fears. And that also includes a number of decisions that are made poorly. So be aware of the language of bogus, and let's work not to repeat it.
Hi, I was just wondering if, I know we've been a few questions already saying, tell us what to do, and I totally appreciate people are saying, it's a big issue, broad social movement, there's no one simple answer. I was just wondering if there were any, in the last little while, if there were any actions that had inspired any of you that maybe some of us might not know about, that you could share as way of inspiration. And also, if you could kind of give, I understand that it's different for everybody in terms of how they want to protest something, but if maybe from your perspectives, if you might have like a top 3 or your top 5, what we can do in the next month. I always think of, was it Rosa Parks, who kind of, she did a really great civil disobedience, and just showed to a lot of people that not all laws are just. And so sometimes people that I think are involved in politics, they just take for granted the real little specific things that you can do to protest. But some of us need to kind of have some examples spelled out. So I just thought it would be great if you had any kind of inspiration to share with us.
I just wanted
to say that I think it's really important for people to speak out and to contact your governments, write letters, get together and petition, and to let people know that you're not happy with what's going on, especially the government, and to let them know that you will not accept certain things to happen without them knowing your disappointment and that you're not in agreement with it.
A movement that inspired me in Montreal, May 21st, in defiance of Bill 78. A group of migrants and allies walked masked. It was very inspiring.
I think the government can be more responsive than we realize. The one instance that I can think of where they actually backed off proposed legislation was the proposal for computer surveillance in the interest of combating child pornography, and the public outreach was so strong that they actually stepped back. I think we can take examples from the environmental movement. They are proposing a blackout in early June to protest the government's attempts to silence them in various ways. I do think that there are patterns that are being repeated in different niches of the government's work, and one of those disturbing trends is the concentration of a lot of power in the hands of very few people, and that's something that we have to speak up against. It goes very much against the rule of law.
We have about 3 more questions and then we will be ending, so if you can just hold off for those last 3 questions, and everyone, I'm sure, will be brief and concise.
I just have a very quick question. What is the current success rate of legit refugee claims that have been processed in a reasonably good time frame, and those people are living happily here in Canada? Are there any good stories at all of refugee claims? That's my question.
Sorry, are you talking about the number of refugee claims
Yeah,
that were accepted at the refugee
that's
court?
right, yeah. They were legit, they were accepted, they were processed in a reasonably well okay time frame, and those people are happy with the
It's been roughly 40%, give or take a few percent, for a long time. I hesitate a little bit to use the word legit, because we have examples in this room. I'm familiar with José's case, I'm not familiar with the others, but there are strong cases which fell through the cracks. And in my experience, the ones that fall through the cracks are often those of people who are traumatized, because traumatized people who are most in need of protection often have the greatest difficulty articulating their claim. The overall success rate is about 40%.
Hi, I have a question for Harsha. Seeing as we're here tonight in the Goldcorp Center for the Arts, I'm hoping that a speaker, perhaps Harsha, could shed light on the role of Canadian mining corporations, mining and oil corporations, in devastating the environment at home and abroad, and displacing people through this process. Thank you.
Quickly.
4 words, Harsha.
I actually was going to mention Goldcorp. So for people who don't know, Goldcorp, Am always corrects me on this. Goldcorp funds the center, am I right, Am?
It's
no.
So complicated.
It's he always tries to convolute it. But Goldcorp gives funding to SFU, so I think it's important to recognize that we're here talking about refugee rights, and we're sitting in a space that's complicit in the displacement of particularly Latin American communities, right? So Honduras and Guatemala. So Goldcorp, short, is one of the world's fastest growing gold producers. It's one of Canada's largest mining operations. Its headquarters are in Vancouver. There's a number of legal cases that have actually been filed, particularly by Guatemalans, about Goldcorp's role in displacing communities in Guatemala. And so, yeah, I mean, Vancouver is mining headquarters, and so I think when we talk about refugees, we talk about it in a really narrow frame of persecution, but displacement is increasingly connected to environmental degradation, environmental refugees, displacement due to, massive corporations. So, the tar sands is, again, going back to displacement of indigenous peoples, is displacing indigenous peoples off of their land. So I think thank you for that question, because it is important to talk about displacement in much broader frameworks than just the very narrow confines of the Refugee Convention. And Goldcorp is very much complicit in that, so we see the twisted logic of sitting here very uncomfortably for me.
Hi, my name is Israel. I'm a refugee, and already passed through the hard hearing with 3 judges. And I made 2 with a positive. But also I'm concerned, and my question is, when this bill passes, the government will have a right as a refugee to mark us in the system and have less chance at work or schools. So I'm concerned with that, because already, 90% of people that I meet, they ask me, oh, so what is your status? And it's hard for me to say that I'm a refugee, because the government tried to look us like a bad people, and I feel like it's hard to feel like no shame, because we know the reality, and also to be strong. Plus, we had to pass through for the racist and classism. So that is my question: is the government will have the right they mark us in the system? Thank you.
Is that our last question? Okay, great. Well, thank you.
Is there an answer?
What's that?
Is there an answer?
Does anyone want to? I don't think that was mostly a comment, but I think that as many people, and as this last commentator pointed out, this bill seems to be a fait accompli. Nevertheless, we had standing room only here, and I think there's hope. I think it's a real endorsement of the democratic process and of the power of voices to make change. We've seen over and over in Canadian history and U.S. history how things happen, injustices happen, and sometimes they get entrenched for long periods of time. But democracy has a way of self-correcting at some point. And several people ask, what can you do? It is, I can see how it would be frustrating, given that there's a sense that this bill is going to happen one way or another. But the fact that this is going on, these conversations are going on, and you, all of you in here will keep this conversation going, I think gives a lot of hope. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you to all of you for showing up. Thank you to Anne, and especially to Shana for organizing this.